Hey everyone, welcome back to more characteristics of quadratic functions. This video is more of a continuation of the last one and a little bit extra repetition. So what I did was I put the three forms, standard form, vertex form, intercept form, that you'll see. It's important that you know the difference between each of the three because it is a slightly different process for finding the axis of symmetry for each one, okay? So looking at this first example, the first blank I put on there was, what's the form? So you have two sets of parentheses. That's going to be intercept form. Intercept form doesn't have the power of 2 anywhere in there. So I'm just going to write intercept form. Okay, so with that, I can identify the x-intercepts. Remember, the x-intercepts are the reverse signs of what's inside. So I have a -6 and a -2. I'm going to write down +6 and +2. And remember, just write it like a coordinate because the y-coordinate's always going to be 0, okay? If it's an x-intercept, it's intercepting the x-axis, so y is always going to be 0. The next thing to do would be to find the axis of symmetry. So if it's an intercept form, the axis of symmetry is p plus q over 2. What's the p and the q? That +6 and the +2, the reverse signs of the inside. So I'm going to write AOS is 6 plus 2 over 2. So I know 6 plus 2 is 8, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So my axis of symmetry is x equals 4. Remember to keep it as an x equals equation, okay? And then once you get your axis of symmetry, now you can find your minimum or your maximum point. So plug it back in, and that you're finding the y value. So plug it into the function. So I'm going to say y equals -1, and then I had x minus 6 times x minus 2. So I'm going to write 4 minus 6 times 4 minus 2. And you're welcome to type this all in as it is into the calculator, and when you do that, you'll get 4 for your answer. So for my min-max value, I'll write y equals 4, okay? So I said, is it a max or a min? Look at the front value, the a, the leading coefficient. Remember from the last video I said if a is positive, it's opening up, and so you have a minimum, you have a lowest point is where the vertex is. If it's opening down, when a is negative, it's opening down, the vertex is the highest point because the parabola is going to open down forever. So I'm going to say it is a maximum point, all right? And then to answer the question for the vertex, we found the x, we found the y, 4, 4. That's all it is, 4, 4. Now, in this video, I'm going over the domain and range. In the last video, I did not do that. So the domain on any parabola, as long as it opens up or down, the domain is always all real numbers. So you can say it like that. You can say it like -infinity less than x less than +infinity. You could also say it like -infinity, +infinity. It doesn't really matter. If I don't ask you to say a specific kind, like this is just all real numbers, this is this is inequality notation, and this is interval notation. If I don't ask you, then put whatever you want. I'm just going to put the R. So the domain's always all real numbers. The range, we had a max point of 4. It was opening down. That's why it was a max point. So 4 is the highest value you can get. Then it's just going down forever. So for the range, I can say y is less than or equal to 4. All right? That's inequality notation. You could say in interval notation, parentheses -infinity would be the smallest value, and then 4 would be the highest value. So either one of those would be acceptable, okay? So let's move on to the next example. With f of x equaling 3 times x minus 4 squared, label the transformations, axis of symmetry, min-max, vertex, and domain and range. Okay, what kind of form is this in? You have an x minus a number and then a squared. So the two of them that have a squared are standard form and vertex form, but standard form has this middle bx term that the vertex form does not have, and the vertex form will often have an x plus or minus a number in parentheses and squared on the outside. Kind of like intercept form, but intercept form doesn't have the power of 2 anywhere. So anyway, this is just a long explanation of me saying it's vertex form. Okay, so now that I know what's in vertex form, the x-intercepts aren't immediately obvious just from looking at the form. So you can skip to the axis of symmetry. If it's in vertex form, what's the axis of symmetry? X equals h. So just flip the sign that's on the inside there. So I had a minus 4, so my axis of symmetry is going to be positive 4, so x equals 4. All right? And so for this one, I said, what are the transformations? Okay? What does that 3 do? And what does that minus 4 do? That 3 is a vertical stretch, so I'm just going to write VS. That 4 is going to go right 4, okay? So I just need to write that in my blank. Okay, so I wrote that in the blank, and again, I did go over more of these transformations in detail in the 3.1 videos, or video. So what's the min or max value? Plug in 4 and get the y value, okay? So I'm going to write 3 times x minus 4, which is 4 minus 4 now, squared equals what? That equals 0. So my max value is y equals 0. There's another way that I could tell that. This was in vertex form, right? So vertex form, this plus k, that's your y coordinate of your vertex. There was no plus k there, so it was just 0. So yeah, I showed my work of plugging it in, but I could have figured that out in my head because knowing that there's no value adding or subtracting on the outside, that k value or the y coordinate of the vertex is 0, and that's what the min or max value is. So, either or. Now, is this a minimum or a maximum point? Look at that 3. That 3 is positive. So you have a parabola that's opening up. So if it's opening up, this is your minimum value, okay? And then it's just going to go up forever. So what's my vertex at? Again, this was in vertex form, as I explained for axis of symmetry and the minimum value. Your vertex is at 4, 0. All right, and I knew that just from looking at the equation. So I didn't actually have to show any work, but I did. It's notes. Why not? Okay, domain and range. Domain, like I said before, it's always all real numbers on a regular parabola that opens up or down. If it opens up sideways, that's a different answer. But we don't really deal with that much in Algebra 2. So the range, you had the lowest point of 0, and then it went up forever. So you can say it as y is greater than or equals to 0. It's pretty much always going to be or equals to for the range, because it's going to pass through that lowest point. You could also say that in interval form, 0 is your lowest point and infinity is your highest point, and they're both in parentheses. Remember, a bracket means you can touch it. So that's all there is to say about number 2. Number 3 is in standard form. You see how it has ax squared plus bx plus c as negative 2x squared plus 6x plus 12. So I'll write standard form. Okay, now that I know what's in standard form, calculating the vertex starts with the axis of symmetry, and, well, like all these did. But the axis of symmetry is negative b over 2a. So flip the sign of the b term and divide it by 2 times a, the front term. So I got a is negative 2, b is 6, and c is 12. So x is going to equal negative b, negative 6, over 2a, 2 times negative 2. So that's going to be negative 6 over negative 4, which is positive 3 over 2, or 1.5. Okay? So I'll write equals 1.5. It doesn't matter if you leave it as a fraction or approximate it to a decimal, but that's our axis of symmetry. And remember, for the vertex, you can already pencil in 1.5 for the x-coordinate, and then when you get the minimum or maximum value, that'll be the y-coordinate of your vertex. So, speaking of which, let's calculate that minimum or maximum value. Let's plug in 1.5 into our function to get our y value. So here it is, everything's set up. I can type this into the calculator, and when I do, I get y equals 16.5. Okay, so now I know my y-coordinate of my vertex is 16.5. And I can also write that for my min-max value. Okay, so the next thing to do is answer the question, was this a minimum or maximum value? Okay, the a was -2. That tells me the parabola is opening down. So I know it sounds confusing, but if it's opening down, you have a maximum value because your vertex is the highest point. And then the sides of the parabola are going to go down forever. It's also easier to look at the picture if you want to do that. So type it in and look at your graphing calculator. So the domain is always all real numbers. The range, it went down forever, right? And 16.5 was the highest value. So I can say y is less than or equal to 16.5. Or you could also say that it went down to -infinity, and then the highest point would be 16.5, and that would be it. Okay? So notice how we did one example with each type of form. All right? So I hope this helped. Stay tuned for additional videos. Goodbye, everyone.